Reports from inside Iran indicate that Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has been moved to his special bunker out of fear that an American strike is imminent. But maybe someone should remind him of what happened to Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah when he went down into a special bunker in Lebanon. In any case, tensions with Iran are rising as more and more American forces arrive in the Middle East ahead of a possible strike. Iran has been working to restore its missile array after the 12-day war, while the United States increases its military preparations in this region. President Trump is considering steps with a decisive effect, while Tehran is threatening a broad response. We'll take a look at the American forces already in this region and other units that are reported to be underway here. And meanwhile, President Trump's envoy were in Jerusalem over the weekend to meet with Prime Minister Netanyahu and other senior Israeli officials. The demilitarization of Gaza and the day after were at the top of the agenda for these meetings, including a plan to spend $1.8 billion building 100,000 apartments and biometric oversight in the new Rafah project in Gaza. And have you heard about the Red Unit, the IDF's women fighters who made Hamas and Hezbollah think twice? We'll tell you about that in just a moment. Welcome to Boots on the Ground. I'm your host, Yair Pinto, bringing you the full truth about what's happening in Israel. The aircraft carrier Abraham Lincoln continues to draw closer to Iran, alongside destroyers that are equipped with Tomahawk missiles. Squadrons of F-15E aircrafts have been deployed to bases in this region, together with refueling aircraft, supply ships, and a command ship. The assessment of Israel's intelligence echelon is that there will be a strike on Iran, even though the understanding is that a decision has not yet been made and the Americans need a few more days to move all the necessary forces into position. But in Israel, we are already preparing for every kind of scenario. Iran's supreme leader also seems to be preparing, moving to a special underground shelter in Tehran after senior officials in the country assessed an increased risk of an American strike. His son, Masoud, received the control authorities and serves as the central communication channel with the government. But although the supreme leader might be physically safe for now, whether he emerges from his bunker, he will have the same problems that brought about this situation in the first place. Iran's economy is a train wreck, and it's getting worse. The United States is blocking Iran's sources of income against the backdrop of reinforcing American forces to this region, and a senior figure in Tehran warns that any strike will be considered an all-out war. And meanwhile, diplomats estimate that the delay in action against Iran stems from one thing, and we'll bring you all the details in today's report. TBN Israel's senior Middle East analyst Mati Shoshani will give us an in-depth look at the demilitarization of Gaza and the day after, as White House envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, who serve as members of the Gaza Executive Board of the Peace Council, met with Prime Minister Netanyahu over the weekend. The focus of these meetings was the demilitarization of the Gaza Strip and the steps required to turn the ceasefire into a long-term diplomatic arrangement. The White House is pressing Israel with full force, but Israel is not giving up on one clear demand: the return of the hostage casualty Ran Gaveli, the move to Phase B in Gaza, the opening of the Rafah crossing, and Iran. And meanwhile, the United Arab Emirates are planning to invest in a first rehabilitation project in Gaza, planned to be a terror-free city in southern Rafah with security supervision, biometric data collection, and American-Israeli involvement. In the northern arena, Hezbollah had a message for all their operatives over this weekend. Secretary General Naim Qassem addressed Hezbollah operatives who were wounded in this fighting against Israel in the past and spoke of a great confrontation led by the United States, while also saluting Iran's supreme leader. And next door in Syria, The gamble of interim President Abu Muhammad al-Julani has paid off with a rapid offensive in the northeast of this country that led to the collapse of the Kurdish SDF militia. The move changes the balance of power and accelerates American discussion about a withdrawal from Syria and puts Israel on high alert. Finally, we'll bring you a story that you won't hear about anywhere else: the spy games in South America and the United States' efforts to curb Iranian influence in the Western Hemisphere. We have a lot to talk about today, so let's dive into the details. I'm Yair Pinto, with me today is Mati Shoshani, and this is your Boots on the Ground report, bringing you the full truth about what's happening in Israel on day 842 of the war against Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, the Shia militias in Iraq, and all the other armed groups in this region that are operating under the control of the Revolutionary Guards in Iran, which is the head of the crumbling axis of evil in the Middle East. A moment before we start, I need to remind you that we are at a moment in reality when the truth is beginning to come to light. Thanks to you, we will defeat the evil and all the lies and the extremist Islamic propaganda. So help us share this content with as many people as possible. Click the subscribe button, share, and become ambassadors of the truth. In the last 24 hours, at the Kiryat, the headquarters of the IDF in Tel Aviv, an unusual meeting took place between the commander of the United States Central Command, CENTCOM, and the IDF Chief of Staff, Eyal Zamir, as well as several other senior IDF officers. This was not just another routine coordination meeting, as it dealt with the one question hovering over the entire Middle East: is the United States going to strike Iran? And what will happen here in Israel if and when that happens? This is important because while our eyes are on the Gaza Strip and on the north, under the radar, a third arena is being built here, in which one move, one mistake, or one decision by President Trump could turn this week into a wave of regional escalation with launches, interceptions, and damage to infrastructure in the Persian Gulf. Let's go by timeline and operational logic. First of all, there is the basic fact that this is another week in which the tension is not going down. It's only shifting up a gear. Israel understands that the Americans need a few more days to complete the entire deployment of the forces in this region. Therefore, as for now, there is no change in the home front command directives, but the security establishment is already preparing for every kind of scenario, including the most severe ones. And the main fear that they speak about is miscalculation, or a scenario in which Iran decides to attack Israel under the assumption that the United States has already decided to strike, even if the decision still hasn't been executed. Now, let's talk about the order of battle that is being deployed in this region by the Americans. For sure, it is not symbolic, but rather preparations for a very serious move. Already this week, there is one aircraft carrier within striking distance of Iran that is escorted by several other surface warships and submarines armed with cruise missiles capable of hitting targets on land. Adding to this picture, squadrons of fighter and attack aircrafts have been deployed to the United States bases in this region, along with refueling aircrafts, electronic warfare and intelligence assets, air defensive systems, and more. The heart of the story is the aircraft carrier Abraham Lincoln. It is making its way to this region with an air wing of 9 squadrons, including F-35C stealth aircraft, FA-18E Super Hornet aircrafts for multi-mission strikes, and EA-18G Growler aircraft for electronic warfare and jamming, a Seahawk helicopters for search and rescue, and also Osprey aircraft for logistical support. This is a combination built to enable an attack, defense, and a long forward presence without dependency on land bases. The Abraham Lincoln is escorted by several Allied Burka-class destroyers equipped with the battle-proven Aegis air defensive systems designed for intercepting incoming cruise and also ballistic missiles, but these ships have also Tomahawk cruise missiles for their own to fire at the enemy at ranges of up to 2,500 kilometers. This gives them the ability to fire at targets in Iran without exposing themselves to accurate Iranian counterfire. And on land, The United States forces are being reinforced by deployments of abroad dozens F-15E aircrafts in addition to squadrons that were already deployed to the region under SETCOM. All of these aircrafts have the ability to stay in the air for extended periods of time because the deployment of KC-135 and the KC-46A refueling aircraft, which provide the operation of continuous strike sequences. And inside this whole story, logistics also enters. In the Gulf, supply and refueling ships are operating that allow the force to remain in position for an extended time without returning to port. Command and control is provided by the command ship, Mount Whitney, which provides coordination between forces that are operating at sea, in the air, and on land. It might seem like a small detail that sounds technical, but it sends a definite message because when you bring a command ship, you bring it to run a campaign, not to show presence. And out in the water, there is also a significant force that includes submarines that bring intelligence capabilities, collection and observation, and also conventional strike capabilities in the form of Tomahawk cruise missiles. The submarines that have reportedly been deployed include the USS South Dakota, a Virginia-class fast attack submarine, and the USS Georgia, an Ohio-class heavy attack submarine armed with around 150 Tomahawk missiles capable of delivering a devastating amount of firepower on any target with no warning. To all this can be added the air defensive systems, which are critical to any engagement with Iran. Those primarily offensive capabilities is its arsenal of cruise and ballistic missiles. One of the explanations given to the delay until now is not a desire to climb down from the tree, but a desire to close the gaps. Gulf states and Israel, according to assessments, feared that the air defense in the region was not enough to absorb a broad Iranian counterattack. Therefore, we are now seeing reinforcement of systems like Patriot and THAAD, including deployment at El Ubaida base in Qatar and at additional points. This is a change that comes before the move, not after. It's part of preparations so that if there is an Iranian response, there will be something to stop it. In parallel, there is also a political economic component that keeps working at the same time. The US announced additional sanctions against Iran over recent days, including 9 ships, ship owners, and operating companies as part of the effort to damage Iran's ability to exploit oil and petroleum and other projects to foreign markets via a shadow fleet. The message is clear. There is not only a military threat, but also financial strangulation aimed precisely at the regime's source of oxygen. For their part, Iranian officials are issuing increasingly hysterical threats, each one more absurd than the last one. For instance, over the weekend, a senior Iranian official stated that if Iran is attacked, it will respond with full force, and that all American bases in the region will be legitimate targets. He also said that any strike would be considered a declaration of war and would be answered accordingly. In parallel, it was said that Tehran is on high alert, including the underground missile units that have been on alert for weeks now. There are also signs of internal consolidation, as it was reported that Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei moved to stay in a fortified underground facility in Tehran with a connected tunnel system, while his son, Masoud, is effectively managing the ongoing contact with regime bodies. I must add that we should be careful about taking these reports at face value, since they are coming from a world that by nature is hard to verify in real time, and therefore it's impossible to determine them as a closed fact. But just the fact that this possibility is being mentioned in Tehran says something about the atmosphere there and the level of concern at the top. In parallel to making absurd threats, Iran's leadership is also working feverishly to rebuild their missile array after the last confrontation, and that chemicals imported from China may be used as fuel for about 500 ballistic missiles, and this is according to the intelligence assessments that a large part of the arsenal survived the 12-day war in underground facilities, and this explains why the Americans are not rushing to pull the trigger, because even after a devastating first blow, a heavy missile response can still come. Aside from that, we must ask the question of why there was not yet a strike against the Ayatollahs. The answer is a combination of three things, including that it takes time to deploy all the tools that will be needed to do the job. And another one is Israel's intelligence echelon that estimates that it may take a few more days until the deployment will be completed. This includes the next point, which is air defensive systems, starting with the buildup of an umbrella around American forces and bases, as well as energy infrastructure in the Gulf. When these critical strategic assets have been protected, the Americans will be free to consider a move that invites a response. And finally, the understanding is that President Trump still hasn't made a final decision. He's demanding that his team provide him with options that will have a decisive effect, and those discussions take time because the moment you decide, it's very hard to make changes. And with all of that having been said, when a force of this size and magnitude is deployed, including an aircraft carrier, destroyers, submarines, fighter jets, tankers, intelligence and defense systems, it usually doesn't end without everything being used. So, where does Israel fit into all of this? Israel is in close coordination with the United States, and the meetings at the Kiryat, the headquarters of the IDF over the weekend, is the clearest sign of that. The coordination is both offensive and operational to ensure that if an Iranian response comes, Israel will not be surprised. And at the same time, Israel also understands that the main threat is not only what Iran will do to the Americans, but what it may try to do here to Israel, to Israelis, to change the rules of the game. So to sum up, the tensions are rising rapidly as the American forces are preparing for action and the IDF is preparing as well, while Iran is sending its leaders to bunkers and keeping missiles on alert. But it's not just the Americans, Israel and Iran. It's also that the entire region is on edge. It's preparing for the day after Iran, while not forgetting what is happening in the meantime in Gaza and what to do in order to move to phase B of the ceasefire plan and the rehabilitation of the Gaza Strip. How will it look like? And at the moment, there's still war going on in Gaza as well. So, TBN Israel's senior Middle East analyst Mati Shoshani will bring us all the information about what's happening in the Gaza Strip, about the move to phase B, and about the attempt to begin rehabilitation and the establishment of the first Gazan city without terror. But first, please look for the subscribe button, click on it, so you never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. Speaking of Boots on the Ground, I want to speak to you for just a moment about our partner for today's video, Magen David Adom, because as the possibility of renewed missile attacks from Iran, and it's coming closer to us, we remember that whenever a missile lands in Israel, the first people at the impact site are the volunteers of Magen David Adom. Before the police, before the army, or anyone else arrives, Magen David Adom medics are already treating the wounded, stabilizing the injured, and saving lives. They don't wait for it to be safe, they just rush towards the danger. That's who they are. That's what they do. But being ready for the next emergency takes more than just bravery. It takes ambulances, armored vehicles, protective gear, trauma equipment, and trained teams ready to act at a moment's notice. And that's where we come in. Your support makes that possible. So if you want to save lives in Israel, especially now, go to savelifeisrael.com. Again, that's savelifeisrael.com. Help Magen David Adom stay strong, stay fast, stay ready for whatever comes next. When time is short and lives are on the line, they are already underway. Let's make sure that they can keep saving lives again and again. Now, we are shifting our focus to the Gaza Strip. President Trump's envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner met with Prime Minister Netanyahu over the weekend in their capacity as members of the board of directors for Gaza for the Peace Council. The issue discussed reportedly included demilitarization of the Gaza Strip and the steps required to turn the ceasefire into a long-term political arrangement. We will now move to TBN Israel's Middle East analyst, Mati Shoshani, who will explain to us what was announced, including Kushner's statements about the new Rafah and the project that is getting on its way. So, over to you, Mati.
Yael just walked you through the latest headlines from Gaza. Now here's the meaning behind that move. Tonight, Trump envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner are sitting with Prime Minister Netanyahu, and the agenda is packed. Phase 2 in Gaza, Phase B, steps towards disarming Hamas, the Rafah crossing, and one painful Israeli demand that is not moving whatsoever, the return of the last hostage, Ron Gvili. And why this matters right now, because Phase 2 is not just the next round. Phase 2 is the test of who controls Gaza after the ceasefire and what price Hamas will be forced to pay after that withdrawal. Now, officially, the American frame is very simple. Turn a ceasefire into a longer political arrangement. Start the day after and push Gaza towards stability. Now, my analysis is the following. Phase B is the bridge between two separate realities. One reality is Gaza as a battlefield. The other is Gaza as a controlled space with rules, screening, and enforcement. Israel wants that bridge to pass through one gate first, the hostages, and not as a slogan, as a proof that Hamas cannot keep manipulating the calendar. Now, at the same time, Israel is signaling something entirely different. Deterrence is back on the table, not as revenge, but as a system that convinces Hamas that refusing to disarm has a cost that only grows from one day to the next. Now, disarming Hamas is not a side topic to this conversation. It's the center of gravity, and the data coming out of Israel's security is very, very blunt on this topic. The assessment is that Hamas will not agree to disarm on its own terms, or on its own at all. That assessment is based on the group's public statements and behavior in recent months. So Israel is preparing two tracks at the same time. Track number 1 is diplomacy and the mechanisms that go with it. Track 2 is readiness for renewed fighting in the disarmament plan, or if the disarmament plan collapses. Now, we've also heard that in the south, preparations are defined as advanced. Now, this matters because when an army talks about advanced preparation, it's a message. It tells Hamas, you don't get to tell or stall forever. You don't get to rebuild your weapons quietly under a ceasefire umbrella, as they've been doing until this very moment. Now look at the other piece on the table, a very significant one, the so-called Rafah project, a reported plan tied to early reconstruction in southern Rafah, funded by the United Arab Emirates, or the UAE. Now the numbers are very impressive. $1.8 billion, ideas of 100,000 permanent housing units, and a controlled, planned community that provides basics like education, health, and running water. But it comes with conditions. Security checks in and out, biometric data collection, digital wallets in shekels designed to block money from flowing to Hamas channels, and even a non-Hamas curriculum reportedly provided by the UAE directly. Now officially, this is framed as rebuilding. Now my analysis is that it's also a power experiment, a model for control without Hamas, and it explains why Hamas will be trying to sabotage it, as they've done up to this very point. Now, according to the reporting and all the sources that we've been tracking, Israel is not supposed to build or manage that community. Israel's role, or our job in this, is clearing dangerous infrastructure, tunnels, booby-trapped buildings, and a continuing operational presence until construction truly begins. Then the concept is that the International Stabilization Force, or ISF, will step in. Now, we don't have the list of final countries, so treat that part as very unfinal, very, let's call it initial in its structure. But the direction is very, very clear. The reconstruction conversation is being built around a security architecture that includes screening and control points, that includes rules and limitations on movement throughout the Gaza Strip, and of course enforcement. And Israel is saying, if Gaza is rebuilt, it cannot be rebuilt as a weapons factory. Hamas wants the opposite, of course. They want to rebuild first, rearm quietly in the background, and then threaten Israel once more, as they've been doing time and time again in recent months. Now the Rafah crossing, the really big topic that's on the table. This is not just a gateway to the Gaza Strip, it's leverage. Now, Washington wants it reopened and functioning as a key junction for reconstruction and aid movement into the Gaza Strip. Egypt is pushing for a fast opening as well for their own interest, and Israel, well, we're resisting the outside timeline. Because for Israel, Rafah is tied to security screening, the hostage leverage, and Hamas weapons pipelines. There's also reporting that Israel wants to limit how many Palestinians enter Gaza from Egypt and even prefers more people to leave than to enter. Now, the details are sensitive and important, and enforcement methods are not clear or set in stone at all. So the main point is strategic. Control of Rafah shapes the next phase. And if you control movement, you shape the governance. If you shape governance, you shape whether Hamas can come back, now, in 3 months, or in 12 months. So here's a very important nuance, something worth delaying on. There are disagreements. There is American pressure for decisions and timelines. There's Israeli resistance on one clear demand: bring home Ron Gvili to Israel. And don't treat hostages as a technical clause. At the same time, Israel is still cooperating. Meetings keep happening, coordination stays tight, because Israel understands something very basic. Without the United States, the diplomatic framework collapses altogether. And without a diplomatic frame, Phase B becomes only a military cycle. So my analysis is that Israel is trying to do both at the same time. Keep leverage on Hamas through the hostage issue, but still build a path that keeps the ceasefire from snapping back into wider war in the Gaza Strip, and by extension, destabilizing this region. There's also a quieter story that explains Israel's logic on the ground. The report about contacts with armed clans in Gaza that oppose Hamas. Now, the claim is that Israel has helped these groups with drones, with intelligence, with weapons, food, and even cigarettes, and that some wounded fighters were evacuated by air to hospitals in Israel. Now, officially, this is framed as tactical cooperation during the ceasefire. My analysis is that it's also a test of whether Hamas can be challenged from within the Gazan society. But the risks are real and very substantial. Those groups are still limited. Some estimates say their numbers range from hundreds to thousands, and there is warning from experienced analysts. Without sustained protection, these groups can face the same fate as past proxy forces in the region: complete elimination, collapse, or flight from the Gaza Strip for fear of retaliation by Hamas. So what happens next? What does the future hold for the Gaza Strip? In the next 7 days, Track 1 is managed Phase B. Hostages progress, including the return of Ron Gvili. Rafah steps forward, and a serious push to lock in disarmament mechanisms. Track 2 is partial movement. Some reconstruction pilot projects advance, like the new Rafah concepts, but Hamas stalls on disarmament and tries to keep weapons hidden. And Track 3 is a breakdown completely. Hamas refuses flat out, the political framework collapses, and Israel activates the prepared military plan to force disarmament by renewed combat operations in the Gaza Strip. The first real sign is this: no speeches, not the mechanisms, but screening systems, enforcement tools, and who actually controls movement at Rafah. Because that is where governance becomes real. That's where it hits the ground, guys. Hamas is a terror organization built to destroy, not to rebuild. It has every incentive to ruin any step that strips it of weapons and power. So it'll have to break the process with pressure, with threats and manipulation of the hostage issue. And that's why the US-Israel coordination is not just helpful, it's the backbone, because Phase B is a power move, not a humanitarian slogan. Deterrence, disarmament, and controlled reconstruction are the only way to stop Gaza from becoming the next launchpad once more. So the real question is whether Hamas is forced into a corner or allowed to reset the clock. Phase B is the moment where Gaza either exists, Hamas rule, or Hamas learns it can survive anything. So let me send this back to Yael. Yael, do you think Washington will back Israel's hostage red line even under the pressure that currently exists?
Now, we are shifting our focus to the northern arena, because over the weekend, we once again heard the sounds of explosions deep inside Lebanon as an Israeli aircraft struck a vehicle near the village of El Ansar in the Baalbek area, and afterwards another strike was reported in the village of Duris. There is currently no clear report of casualties, but the message is clear. While all eyes are on Iran, the IDF continues to enforce red lines in the north so that Hezbollah does not mistakenly think that the arena is open. That is the question on everybody's mind, that if there is a strike in Iran, will Hezbollah enter the campaign, and how is it preparing for that possibility? In recent days, an unusual message was released attributed to Hezbollah's Secretary General Naim Qassem, directed to the organization's operatives who were injured in the fighting against Israel. The text does not speak about routine, it speaks about a major confrontation, one that Hezbollah claims is being led by the American tyrant with support from Israel and from other Western countries. Qasem also praised Iran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei and presented him as the one leading the path of resistance. This is not only propaganda, but an attempt to prepare the ground, strengthen morale, and signal to operatives that they are still needed. Israel is reading this differently, because after the deadline for dismantling Hezbollah south of the Litani River, it already expired. The Lebanese army announced disarmament and progress, but Israel has rejected this claim. The understandings here are that Hezbollah still holds weapons in the field and that the pace of action by the Lebanese army is slow and partial. There is also an assessment that some of the weapons that were collected were not destroyed, but kept in warehouses, and an interim solution that prevents a confrontation with Hezbollah, but also does not disarm it. Therefore, the IDF continues mowing the grass, with enforcement strikes, open intelligence, and a finger on the trigger. And at the same time, Israel is also preparing for the most dangerous scenario, an American decision to act in Iran that will trigger pressure from Tehran and Hezbollah to join, even to just prove their loyalty to the Islamic Revolution. On the Lebanese side, the government fears a head-on collision that could ignite a civil war, and a senior Hezbollah figure has recently warned that continued attempts to disarm Hezbollah could lead to chaos. However, it doesn't end in Lebanon. Hezbollah also operates from Syria, and there too, according to reports, Israel has struck its infrastructure in the recent period, but now the war in arena is different because of the advance of forces that are loyal to the El-Julani regime and the capture of new territories and what that does to the balance of power and to minorities in the north. And amidst all of this, Hezbollah is signaling preparations for a major confrontation, while the IDF is signaling to it in advance that any attempt to raise its head will be met with a hard blow. That brings us to the next question about what is happening on the Syrian front. Who is advancing there, and where does this meet Israel right now? Zeroing in on events in Syria, heavy fire was reported again in the Aleppo area over the weekend, as El-Julani's regime forces are pushing out the Kurdish militias in the northeast and moving fast with very few breaks. This changes everything. Now, because the moment the territory changes hands at such a speed, the ISIS prison camps, the border with Turkey, and our border in the north all enter the same equation. Syria's interim president Abdel Mohammed El-Julani continues to push forward. His latest move succeeded not only because of force, but because of politics on the ground. Arab factions within the Syrian Democratic Forces militia alliance and the framework switched sides, and the Kurds retreated within days from wide areas. The regime is taking control of strategic assets, including oil fields in the east and a central dam on the Euphrates. These assets give the regime control over money, the supply of electricity, and movement throughout the entire area. In any case, this is the new Syria, characterized by a fast offensive, shifting borders, and great powers recalculating their route. The question is whether the regime in Damascus will stop at clear lines or continue pushing until we all enter the next confrontation. So stay tuned to TBN Israel for continuous coverage of all these issues, and we will close today's report with a prayer for peace and security for the people of Israel, the people of Iran, and for this region to have peace. So we will continue to bring you the whole truth about what's happening in Israel. We call on you to unite in prayer for wisdom to our leaders, to your leaders, for prayer for defense of all the forces that are coming to this region, all of our allies, that God will save them. We pray for our enemies as well, not to succeed in their plans, but to have a supernatural encounter with God that will change their hearts to love Israel instead of hating us and the West and the United States. Let's pray for all the people in the Gaza Strip, if it's Palestinians, if it's the IDF. Let's pray for peace in this region. So keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem.